But first of all, let's talk about what happened at the end of last week. Because since I've last been on air, we had the election of one George Galloway, once again, for yet another different political party, in yet another different seat, carpetbagger extraordinaire in Rochdale. He was elected, whopping percentage of the vote, almost 40%. He today will be going into Parliament and will be sworn in as an MP and be facing people like Rishi Sunak, who he says he despises in an interview afterwards at PMQs this week, etc. This as Rishi Sunak on Friday night decided, maybe for the second time in his premiership, once was when he became Prime Minister, the second time to give a speech outside Downing Street between the rainfall, talking about the need to tackle extremism on British streets. Before we discuss, I just want to play a very short clip of what Rishi Sunak had to say.
Now our democracy itself is a target. Council meetings and local events have been stormed. MPs do not feel safe in their homes. Long-standing parliamentary conventions have been upended because of safety concerns. And it is beyond alarming that last night the Rochdale by-election returned a candidate who dismisses the horror of what happened on October the 7th, who glorifies Hezbollah and is endorsed by Nick Griffin, the racist former leader of the BNP. Islamist extremists and far-right groups are spreading a poison. That poison is extremism. It aims to drain us of our confidence in ourselves as a people and in our shared future.
It was quite a lengthy address, and it went along that ilk. I thought a lot of people, probably including you and me, were quite surprised by the talk about Islamist extremists and far-right groups. Far-right groups got a number of mentions. I wasn't aware that anything that happened either in Rochdale, other than the endorsement of Nick Griffin, what happened in Parliament the week before when Lindsay Hoyle was either persuaded, threatened or whatever to change parliamentary procedure with MPs being threatened. That's Islamic extremists, isn't it? I mean, the marches every other Saturday in London, I haven't seen any far-right ones. That's Islamic extremism. Why do you think when he was tackling extremism, he said, well, talking about tackling extremism, that he felt the need to mention far-right extremists too?
Because this country has an unofficial blasphemy code, which says if you're going to say something about Islam, you have to say something about the far right. Yeah. Let's be really clear. There were 50% mentions there for Islamism and 50% mentions for the far right. Let's talk about some actual facts. Over 90% of credible terrorist threats in this country come from Islamists. Over 80% of those on the terrorist watch list are, in fact, Islamists. Yes, there is a small, very small, comparatively, pocket of far-right extremists that have grown in recent years.
And we want them tackled too. But that's not the issue today.
Bury them under the car park, as far as I'm concerned. But calling a spade matters. We have a terrorist problem in this country, and overwhelmingly it is from the Islamists, those that want to make Islam the political basis of our country, community. And it has got dramatically worse in recent months. And weekend after weekend, they are marching through London and cities across this country, making the Jewish residents of those places feel terrified to walk out. And instead, what does the Prime Minister of this country do when he's giving a speech faced with this enormous sudden insurgency? He has to create a false moral equivalency. It's disgusting. It's an infection that runs through the metropolitan elite that I'm afraid are still governing the vast bulk of institutions in this country.
And it's fundamentally dishonest, isn't it? It is. And as you say, it is like a blasphemy law. You're not allowed to say it. And again, even with the criticisms of Lee Anderson, again, I believe that Lee Anderson is correct to say that Sadiq can't, by the way, and London and Keir Starmer, because there was a full sentence, we played it out again and again on this show, find out why is the media cutting out the rest of this clip where he said we're being controlled by Islamists. No, but the Islamists want to control him. And I don't think Keir Starmer and Sadiq Khan controlled by them, but they're definitely influenced and fearful of them. And we see that. And we see this with the election in Rochdale of George Galloway, where he said, basically, this is a victory for Gaza. I mean, by the way, George Galloway is not the MP for Rochdale. He's also not the MP for Gaza. He's the MP for George Galloway. George Galloway cares about George Galloway, and that's about it. I mean, But the leafleting. Now we've seen targeted leafleting over the years. Of course we do. Like targeting families or targeting pensioners. And we've seen that with Facebook, on social media. We see it also in the actual leaflets perhaps given in different streets by candidates. But the blatant targeting in largely Muslim voting areas, it was all about Gaza and Palestinians. That's literally all that was in the leaflets. And then in whiter areas, it was basically all about, save the local hospital and Rochdale grooming gangs and I know what a woman is and whatever, and things like that. I mean, I'm sorry. It was so blatant. But, the attacks on Galloway, I don't like George Galloway. I don't think he's a very pleasant human being. I think he's all about, as I say, George Galloway. But he's democratically elected. If the Labour Party can't find a candidate who doesn't spout the most virulent, disgusting anti-Semitism, and by the way, the man is a senior figure in the local politics, so the idea they didn't know what he thought before is ridiculous. He's made his anti-Semitic comments, in blatant, open public meetings and hasn't been challenged. If the Tories can't find a decent candidate, if, by the way, Reform UK can't find a candidate who hasn't, texted teenagers, for goodness sake, then I'm sorry, then you deserve George Galloway. The only people who don't deserve George Galloway are the poor downtrodden people of Rochdale who're going to have a useless MP for the next few months.
Look, you can whinge about his two-track messaging, but if he wasn't right, he wouldn't have won. And the reality is...
That's democracy.
We have parallel communities in this country. We have people that don't care about their hospitals, do care exclusively, it seems, about what is going on in the Middle East, and want this country to impose their own religious sense of how that region ought to be governed. And look, you had hordes running down the street intimidating people. We had 2 weeks ago a coup d'etat in this country. We had parliamentary democracy subverted on the basis of a horde of violent thugs that were feared to be out there.
And it wasn't just the people outside, it's the people who are making the threats all the time. And we know those threats are real because we've seen terror attacks on our streets, whether it's Manchester Arena, Westminster Bridge, 2 in London Bridge. Whether it's an MP being stabbed to death, an MP being stabbed and thankfully surviving in Stephen Timms, other threats. The Justice Minister doesn't trust that this state can keep him safe and is standing down as an MP. This is Mike Freer. How much more of a message do you need to hear?
Wake up. This country is under immense danger, not only from dictators around the world that are increasingly getting viscerally and violently angry at us and threatening war in Europe and elsewhere, but also from, and I'm afraid I have to put it in these terms, I'll get criticised for it, an enemy within.
Yep.
There are people who live on our streets, who go send their kids to school with your kids, that want to destroy this country, want to do away with its institutions, with your freedoms, its democracy. And the way you know that, 2 years on, the teacher at Batley Grammar School in this country gave a perfectly ordinary religious studies class. He is living his life in fear and violence and in hiding from the threat of a murderous Islamist mob.
And this is the thing, because one of the things Rishi Sunak said, and we are building Britain together. We're a country where we love our neighbours, but I fear that our great achievement in building the world's most successful multi-ethnic, multi-faith democracy is being deliberately undermined. Yes, but is it successful if MPs are fearful for their lives from this? Is it successful if MPs need to have security and bodyguards? Is it successful if a teacher can't have a teacher class as they choose? Is it successful if you can't show any film in a cinema because people will threaten? I mean, at the end of the day, is it a successful democracy? And again, he didn't say multicultural there, but that's kind of what he meant, because I don't believe it can be successful multicultural. I think you should have one culture, and the culture is the British culture, which is our values as a Western liberal nation. I think in such a culture, right now, I could show a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad as depicted in Charlie Hebdo magazine, and I wouldn't face death threats and fear for my family's safety. But I wouldn't do it because I do fear for their safety. So I'm being cowed. I think we should all be able to show that, and people can say, I don't like that because of my faith, that's against my faith, but I accept that you in this democracy have a right to do that. But that's not what even a majority of Muslims in this country think. Polling has shown very clear, believe that that should be an imprisonable offence. Well, I'm sorry, we don't have a blasphemy law in this country. What we do have is fear of death. And that is what is controlling our politics, controlling our media, controlling the national conversation. And I think British people have said, enough. We're not having it anymore.